"Get out of here, old parasite. There's no room for you." Heather's scream ricocheted through my beach house like a shotgun blast. My own beach house. The keys trembled in my hand as I stood frozen at the doorway, the salty morning breeze on my face suddenly tasting bitter. From the terrace, my daughter-in-law glared at me with an expression so sharp, so merciless, that for a moment I felt stripped of everything I had ever built. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday. I had driven down the coast, expecting to unlock a silent sanctuary that had been mine for over 20 years. Instead, what I found looked more like a battlefield after a riot. 3 unfamiliar cars were jammed into my driveway. Loud music rattled the windows. The smell of burnt meat and cheap beer drifted from the living room, where strangers laughed as if they owned the place. Children I didn't recognize were chasing a ball across my deck, knocking over the red geraniums I had nursed for a decade. My wicker chairs, those same chairs I had bought with such care last summer, were now covered in wet towels and sticky soda cans. But the worst of it wasn't the chaos. It was Heather. She stood planted in my doorway like a gatekeeper, wearing one of my aprons, the very one I had embroidered by hand years ago. And in her eyes was that cold, dismissive look I had seen before at family dinners, but never this bold, never this public. "Heather," I tried to steady my voice, though my chest was tight. "What is going on? This is my house. I've spent every holiday here since I was 50 years old. I built this place with my own hands." Her laugh was cruel, the kind of laugh meant to cut a person down to nothing. "Oh, please, Maggie. Dan told me we could use this house whenever we wanted. Unlike you, we're making it useful, for family, for real life. You just come here to hide and complain." Behind her, more faces appeared. Her sister, Sam, with 2 restless teenagers. Her mother, Patricia, whose eyes scanned me with disdain, as if I were the intruder. Then a tanned uncle in a Hawaiian shirt, a young woman balancing a baby, and a man smoking calmly on my balcony, as if it were his God-given right. One by one, they looked at me with thinly veiled annoyance, as if I were the inconvenience, not them. Patricia leaned closer to her daughter and sneered loud enough for me to hear. "So this is the famous mother-in-law you always talk about? I expected someone stronger. Honestly, she looks rather ordinary." Their laughter pierced me like needles. And there I stood, 70 years old, travel-weary in my simple clothes, being judged and mocked by strangers in the home I had built brick by brick after losing my husband. "Where's Dan?" I asked, my voice trembling but determined. My son had to be here. Surely this madness had an explanation. "He's working as always," Heather answered, arms folded. "Unlike you, he has real responsibilities. And listen, Maggie, there's no space for you here. The rooms are taken, the kitchen is ours, and frankly, your presence just stirs up tension." Her words sliced deeper than knives. In that moment, I realized the unthinkable. My daughter-in-law wasn't just disrespecting me. She was pushing me out of my own house. The house I had dreamed of, sacrificed for, and built from nothing. And yet, as humiliation burned through me, something else stirred inside, a quiet, dangerous fire. Heather believed she had won, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with. I froze at the threshold, but my mind refused to stay anchored in that humiliating moment. As Heather's smug voice echoed in my ears, my thoughts slipped backward, 20 years back, to a time when this house was nothing but a stubborn dream lodged in the heart of a 50-year-old widow. Back then, people called me crazy. A beach house? On your own? Maggie, you should think smaller. But I had just buried my husband, and grief has a way of clearing the fog. I knew I needed a place, a sanctuary, not only for me, but also for Dan, my only child. I wanted him to have something solid when everything else in our lives felt like it was crumbling. I can still see that August morning as vividly as if it were yesterday. The lot was empty, tangled with weeds, wild grass swaying in the ocean breeze. I stood there in my worn-out work shoes, clutching a savings passbook that held the story of decades. Every penny I had earned, sewing gowns, altering uniforms, stitching curtains for families who could afford luxuries I could only imagine. My fingers had been pricked raw by needles thousands of times. The skin on my knuckles cracked from long hours at the machine. But each stitch, each dollar was one step closer to this dream. The architect I hired that day looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, shuffling his papers, "a project like this will run you at least $45,000. Are you sure you can manage that?" I remember the weight of silence before I pulled out my bank book and placed it firmly on the table. It showed exactly $45,000, saved penny by penny. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. He probably thought widows spent their lives shrinking, fading into the corners of society. Not me. Not Margaret Whitaker. Dan was 25 then, still wide-eyed and hopeful. He came with me the first day the construction crew arrived. His excitement filled the air. "Mom, are we really going to have a beach house?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We're not just going to have it, son," I told him, guiding his hand as I marked where the foundation would go. "We're going to build it together." And so we did. For 2 years, every spare weekend, I drove to the site with thermoses of coffee, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a determination stronger than concrete. I carried sand in buckets, rolled paint onto walls until my arms ached, and planted saplings that are now towering trees shielding the garden. Dan joined whenever he didn't have classes. We stood shoulder to shoulder, choosing the creamy color of the walls, the tiles that would catch the afternoon light in the kitchen, the angle of each window so the sea breeze could drift in naturally. The day the house was finished, we stood on the deck together. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, the sun setting in a blaze of orange. Dan hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mom, you're the strongest woman I know. Someday, when I have a family, I'll tell them how my mother built paradise out of nothing but love and hard work." That memory clung to me now like a cruel contrast. How had that same boy grown into a man who allowed his wife to treat me as if I were disposable? I thought back to Heather's earlier years when she first married Dan. She used to arrive at this very house with a warm smile and words dripping with admiration. "Mother Whitaker, this place is beautiful. You must be so proud." She would help me set the table, play with the children on the beach, sometimes even bring flowers from the market. For a while, I thought I had gained a daughter. But somewhere along the way, gratitude turned to entitlement. Perhaps it was when Dan landed that better-paying job and Heather stopped working. Perhaps it was when they bought their own house in the city and she began to see herself as superior to the seamstress who had stitched her way through widowhood. I ignored the small signs then, the condescending comments about my age, the suggestions to dress more modern, the sly remarks about how wasteful it was to keep this house empty most of the year. I brushed them off, believing they were harmless. How wrong I had been. Heather hadn't changed overnight. She had been plotting, step by step, feeding her disdain until it grew into this invasion, this hostile takeover of the one place that had been purely mine. I looked past Heather's smug stance into the living room and saw the destruction with fresh eyes. Inflatable mattresses thrown across my floor, the fine curtains I had sewn myself shoved aside carelessly, beer cans rolling under the dining table I had sacrificed months of labor to afford. I remembered the countless orders I had taken. Brides demanding perfect gowns, parents needing uniforms altered overnight, homeowners wanting curtains hemmed before Thanksgiving, all so I could afford that table. Every object in this house told a story of sacrifice. The kitchen pots, they cost $200 I had saved by wearing the same winter coat for 3 years. The china plates, each one purchased separately, over months until the set was complete, a reward for endurance, not extravagance. And now Heather dismissed them as old and useless. The humiliation of standing there, treated as an unwanted guest in the home I had built with my blood and sweat, was nearly unbearable. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something deeper burned. Rage. Not the wild, uncontrollable rage that explodes into screaming, but the cold, intelligent rage of a woman who has endured, who has survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of relentless work. Heather thought she was dealing with a harmless old lady who would quietly retreat. She didn't realize she had just declared war on someone who had faced life alone and won. The next morning, I returned to the house. I told myself I would go calmly, that perhaps I had misread the situation, that maybe Heather's behavior was a temporary flare of arrogance fueled by the chaos of too many relatives under one roof. I clung to that fragile hope as I parked my car by the garden I had once tended so carefully. But the first blow struck me before I even stepped inside. My own front door was locked. I had to ring the bell like a stranger. When Sam, Heather's sister, appeared in her pajamas, she looked at me with the kind of irritation you reserve for salesmen who knock at dinner time. "What do you want now?" she muttered. I forced a smile, though my chest was tightening. "Good morning. I need to pick up a few of my personal things, and I'd like a word with Heather." "She's sleeping," Sam replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Your stuff isn't here anymore, anyway. We put it in bags in the garage so it wouldn't be in the way." "My things. In bags. In the garage." The words dropped like stones in my stomach. Every possession I had chosen with love, every thread of fabric, every book, every photo frame, I was being told they had been scooped up and shoved into garbage bags like clutter in a stranger's attic. I stepped past her, refusing to let humiliation root me to the porch. The smell inside was foreign: grease, cigarette smoke, a haze of cheap perfume. My living room was unrecognizable. Inflatable mattresses sprawled across the hardwood floor. Clothes littered the chairs. Beer bottles lined the mantel where my late husband's picture had once stood. And the kitchen. Oh God, the kitchen. The stove I had polished every time I visited was black with grease. The sink overflowed with dishes that reeked of sour food. My best pots, the set I had saved for months to buy, were scorched beyond repair. "Where are my china plates?" I asked, my voice shaking. Sam shrugged. "Some broke. The kids were playing. You know how they are. Anyway, Heather said they were old. Old, worthless, disposable. But those plates had been my treasures. I had bought them one at a time, marking milestones in my life. To see them dismissed with a shrug made me feel as if someone had taken a blade to years of sacrifice and cut them to ribbons. I went upstairs, clinging to the hope that at least my bedroom would remain untouched. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, I found Patricia, Heather's mother, sorting clothes in my closet as though she had lived there for years. "Excuse me," I said, struggling to keep my composure. "This is my room." She turned with a smirk. "Oh, don't worry, dear. Heather explained everything. I'll take very good care of things. Look, I even organized your clothes into bags so they won't wrinkle." She pointed to plastic trash bags stuffed with my dresses, my blouses, my shoes. Items I had cherished for decades, reduced to wrinkled piles of fabric ready to be tossed. On the bed, my bed, 2 children I didn't even know sprawled asleep, drooling on the pillows I had once embroidered by hand. "My bed," I whispered. "Don't be so dramatic," Patricia snapped. "Megan said you weren't going to use this room anymore. The kids need a comfortable place to sleep." I turned away before she could see the tears burning my eyes. Downstairs again, my gaze caught Heather on the terrace, sipping coffee from one of my favorite mugs, wearing my robe, chatting on her phone as though she were the lady of the house. "Yes, Mom," she said into the receiver. "The house is perfect. Don't worry. I've handled everything. The mother-in-law understands how things are now." She laughed, as though my humiliation was a punchline in a private joke. I stepped onto the terrace, my voice trembling but firm. "Heather, this house is legally mine. I pay the taxes. I maintain it. I have the documents. You and your family need to leave." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, please, don't start with your legal drama. Dan is your son, isn't he? What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. That's how family works." "No," I said, my voice hardening. "That's how thieves work." Her laughter curdled. "Go ahead, call a lawyer. Call the police. Sue your own son. You won't win, Maggie. We've already thought this through." Her words unsettled me. Thought this through. The phrasing lingered like a foul stench. Later that afternoon, under the pretense of retrieving my medication, I returned to the house. Heather was distracted, hosting a barbecue on my deck with her extended family. Smoke from the grill curled into the air as they laughed, clinked glasses, and trampled the garden I had once nurtured with such devotion. I slipped upstairs, my heart pounding, and went straight to the hidden compartment behind my closet, the small space I had always kept private. It was where I stored my most precious documents, the jewelry my mother left me, the watch my husband had worn until his final day. The door was ajar, my sanctuary violated. Papers lay scattered on the floor. The jewelry box was empty, and in their place, I found documents that were not mine, legal papers bearing Dan's name and Heather's signature. My trembling fingers scanned the words, and my stomach turned to ice. It was a petition to transfer the property into Dan's name, citing my advanced age and deteriorating mental capacity as justification. Mental incapacity. Me, the woman who had balanced every ledger for 70 years, who had raised a son alone, who had worked herself raw and saved every penny to build this house. I was being painted as a senile old woman, incapable of managing her own affairs. At the bottom of the stack, another paper chilled me to the bone. A real estate appraisal valuing my home at $300,000. And scribbled in Heather's handwriting, "With this money we can buy a bigger apartment and put the kids in private school. We just need Dan to sign, and for the old lady not to cause trouble." The old lady. That was all I was to them now. A burden to be silenced, an obstacle to be brushed aside. Then came the final blow. As I crept back downstairs, I overheard Heather on the phone again. This time she wasn't laughing. She was speaking low, serious, calculating. "Yes, we already paid the doctor. $50 for the report. He said she has dementia." Dan hesitated, but I convinced him it's for the good of the kids. Once we file, the house will be ours. I felt my knees weaken. A forged medical report, a crooked doctor, a conspiracy involving my own son. The world blurred around me, but through the haze of betrayal, one thing became crystalline clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war. A war Heather thought she had already won. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Heather's smirk, heard her mocking voice, felt the sting of humiliation. My own son's silence replayed in my mind like a broken record. He hadn't defended me once. He hadn't even looked me in the eyes while his wife dismantled everything I had built. By dawn, I was sitting in the corner of the hotel room at the Golden Sands, nursing a bitter cup of coffee. The decision had already formed inside me, clear and sharp. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one. But this battle would not be fought with screaming matches or slammed doors. I had survived poverty and widowhood. I knew the power of patience, preparation, and strategy. I started with evidence. At 7 a.m, I returned to the house under the pretense of retrieving medication I had forgotten. Heather barely glanced at me when I walked in. She was too busy seasoning meat for another barbecue, as if my terrace were her personal stage. That suited me fine. I slipped upstairs and pulled out my phone. Every stain, every broken plate, every scorched pan, I documented them all. The shredded curtains, the greasy stove, the overturned flower pots in the garden. Then I photographed the scattered legal documents I had found in my hidden closet, careful to capture Dan's name, Heather's signature, and the damning appraisal with her handwriting. When I finished, my phone brimmed with images of destruction, betrayal, and fraud. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt control. From there, I drove straight to the bank. George Matthews, the branch manager, had known me for over 15 years. He was a man who valued discipline, and he had always admired the way I kept my finances precise. As I walked into his office, his brow furrowed with concern. "Maggie, is everything all right?" I placed my folder on his desk. "I need 2 things, George. First, the exact balance of all my accounts. Second, an official letter stating that I am fully competent to manage my finances." His eyes widened. Competent? Has someone challenged that? My family is trying to have me declared mentally incapacitated, I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled slightly. They want to seize my assets. The weight of my words seemed to sober him instantly. He turned to his computer, tapped quickly, and then printed out a document. When he handed it to me, my eyes scanned the numbers. 87,000 in savings, 23,000 in certificates of deposit, 12,000 in checking, $122,000 in total. Heather thought I was a frail widow living on a pension. She had no idea I had been quietly, relentlessly saving for decades. That money had been my shield, my proof that I could stand on my own. Now it was going to be my weapon. Maggie, George said, his voice low but firm, you need a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. Someone who knows family law and fraud. Someone who can shut this down before it goes further. I leaned forward. Do you know someone I can trust? He slid a card across the desk. Richard Coleman. He's the best in the state when it comes to cases like this. If anyone can protect you, it's him. Tell him I sent you. For the first time in days, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. I left the bank and parked by the coast, staring at the waves crashing against the rocks. My phone was heavy with evidence. My purse held the financial assurance I needed, and now I had a name, a man who could help me turn this tide. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I found myself in Richard Coleman's office. He was in his mid-60s, gray hair, sharp eyes, the kind of man who exuded quiet authority. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, and the shelves were lined with thick law volumes that seemed to whisper promises of justice. Mrs. Whitaker, he greeted me, extending a firm hand. George Matthews spoke very highly of you. Sit down and tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail. And I did. I told him about the invasion, the insults, the destruction of my belongings. I told him about the documents in my secret closet, the appraisal, Heather's handwritten note, and the forged medical report. I told him about Dan, my son, standing by silently, even lending his name to the fraud. Richard listened without interrupting, his pen moving swiftly across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back and tapped the papers thoughtfully. Your case, he said, is solid. Very solid. We're talking trespassing, theft, falsification of medical documents, attempted asset fraud, and possibly conspiracy. If we act quickly, we can file an emergency eviction order. With the evidence you've gathered, the judge will have no choice but to act. His words washed over me like a balm. For days I had felt powerless, stripped of my dignity, but now, finally, I had someone who believed me, who could give shape to my anger and turn it into action. How long will it take? I asked. The eviction? He smiled. If the court sees what I see, it could be immediate. As for the fraud charges, those will take longer, but trust me, Maggie, we will win. And your fee? $5,000 for the full process. I didn't hesitate. I can pay it today. His eyes softened, almost in admiration. Most clients in your position are scared, unprepared, but you've been planning for this your whole life, haven't you? I've been preparing to defend myself from the world for 70 years, I replied, my voice steady. I'm not going to stop now. For the first time since Heather had spat those venomous words at me, I felt like myself again, not the frail widow they saw, not the old lady they mocked. I was Margaret Whitaker. I had built this life brick by brick, stitch by stitch, and I would not let anyone steal it from me. That night, as I left Richard's office, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I stood for a long moment, breathing in the salty air, and allowed myself a smile. Heather thought she had cornered me. She thought she could humiliate me into silence, push me into a corner until I surrendered. But she had just awakened something far more dangerous than she could ever imagine, a woman with evidence, with money, with a lawyer, and with nothing left to lose. Monday morning arrived gray and heavy, as though the sky itself sensed the storm about to break. From the terrace of the Golden Sands Hotel, I watched through binoculars as my son pulled his shiny new Toyota into the driveway of the house I had built with my blood and bone. He walked up the path casually, as if nothing were wrong, as if his mother hadn't been humiliated and thrown out of her own home. Heather rushed to greet him, a kiss on the cheek, children running to hug his legs. He looked every bit the picture of a successful family man. My stomach turned. I waited 20 minutes before approaching. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him to feel as though he still controlled the situation. When I finally rang the bell, my own doorbell, he opened it. "Mom," he said, flashing that same forced smile I had seen since he was a boy caught lying about his grades. "How are you? Heather told me you came over this weekend." I let the silence stretch. Then I asked slowly, carefully, "Is that all she told you, Dan?" He shifted uncomfortably, jingling his car keys the way he always did when he was nervous. "Well, she said there was a small misunderstanding, but everything's settled now. We talked about this before, remember?" "Talked about what exactly?" My eyes locked on his. He avoided my gaze. About using the house. "You hardly come here, Mom, and Heather's family needs a place to gather. It just makes sense." I pulled the folded documents from my bag and placed them in his hands. "And did we also talk about declaring me mentally incompetent?" His face drained of color. His lips moved, but no sound came out. For a moment, I saw the boy I had raised, scared, cornered, desperate. But the moment vanished as Heather's footsteps clicked across the hardwood behind him. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with annoyance. She saw the papers in his hand, and her eyes narrowed. "What did you show her?" "She found them," Dan whispered. Heather's tone sharpened like broken glass. "What papers?" "Oh, those. Dan, your mother is confused again. You know how she gets when she's under stress." "I'm not confused," I said, my voice firm, "and I'm not senile, no matter what the fake medical report you bought says." For the first time, Heather's mask slipped. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with hatred. "You were spying on us?" "I was protecting my house from thieves." Her voice rose to a shriek. "Thieves? We are not thieves. Dan is your son. He has a right to this property." Dan looked at the floor, shame flickering across his features. "A right to inherit when I die," I shot back, "not to steal while I'm alive." The room fell silent. Even the children playing outside seemed to pause, as though sensing the gravity in the air. Heather stepped closer, her jaw tight. "You're already old, Maggie. How many more years do you think you'll live? Why not let us use the house productively instead of letting it rot?" Those words struck like a knife, but before I could speak, Dan's voice finally cut through. "Heather, stop." She turned to him, incredulous. "What? You agree with me, don't you? Tell her we already spoke to the lawyer. Tell her it's time to sign the papers and stop clinging to the past." Dan's hands shook as he held the documents. He looked at me, then at her, torn between loyalty and fear. His lips trembled. "Mom, I did know about the papers." The floor seemed to fall out beneath me. Hearing him admit it, hearing my own son confess he had stood by while his wife plotted to declare me incompetent, was worse than all of Heather's insults combined. "And the fake medical report?" I pressed. He hesitated. "Heather said it was just a formality, that lots of families do it, that it was normal, that it was to protect you." My chest burned. Protect me from what? From managing my own money? From living in my own home? From remembering every sacrifice I ever made for you? Dan flinched. His voice cracked. "Mom, we're drowning in expenses. The kids need school, the mortgage is behind, Heather lost her job. And so you decided to rob me," I said, cutting him off. "It wasn't robbing," Heather snapped. "It was being practical. You don't need 2 homes at your age. You're wasting resources. We were trying to use them for family." "Family?" My voice rose, sharper than I intended. "Family doesn't forge documents. Family doesn't fake dementia reports. Family doesn't invade a mother's sanctuary and throw her clothes in garbage bags." The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Heather's face flushed with rage. "You think you can scare us with your little speeches? You have nothing, Maggie. No money for lawsuits, no strength for battles. You're a bitter old woman, and this house will be ours." I smiled then, a cold, deliberate smile that made her falter. "You're wrong, Heather. I have money, I have strength, and I have a lawyer." For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. Dan looked at me, his lips trembling. "Mom, please, don't do this. Don't drag us through the courts. We're family." "Family," I repeated, letting the word cut. "You chose to betray me for money. You chose silence while your wife humiliated me. You chose papers that declared me unfit when you know I am sharper than either of you will ever be. No, Daniel, the choice was yours. And now the consequences are mine to deliver." Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Dan's shoulders sagged under the weight of shame. I turned toward the door, the documents tucked back into my bag, my head high. As I stepped into the sunlight, I knew this battle was no longer about a house. It was about dignity, justice, and the dangerous mistake my family had made in underestimating me. They had drawn first blood, but I would finish the war. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, as though the universe itself wanted to bear witness to justice. I arrived in a taxi precisely at 8 o'clock, my best gray suit pressed, my hair tied neatly, my folder of evidence tucked under my arm. Standing beside me was Richard Coleman, my attorney, calm and composed in his tailored navy suit. With him came a uniformed police officer and a public notary, their presence unmistakably official. The caravan pulled into the driveway of my beach house, and I could see Heather's family gathered on the terrace, sipping coffee as if they owned the place. For one delicious moment, I watched their faces shift, from smug to stunned, from comfortable to panicked. Heather's porcelain mug slipped from her fingers and shattered against the stone floor when she spotted the police car. Richard's voice was firm and clear as he stepped forward. "Good morning. I am attorney Richard Coleman, legal representative of Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the sole owner of this property. We are here under court order to deliver an immediate eviction for unlawful trespassing." Heather rushed down the steps, her hair in disarray, her face twisted with disbelief. "This is insane. This is my husband's house. We have every right to be here." The officer's tone was flat, professional. "Do you have any documents proving legal ownership?" "My husband is her son," Heather shot back. "That gives us rights." "Where is your husband?" Richard asked coolly. "He's at work," Heather snapped. "Convenient," Richard replied, pulling papers from his briefcase. "Here are the original property deeds, 100% under Mrs. Hayes's name. Here are the property tax receipts from the last 5 years, all paid by her. And here," he handed another document to the notary, "is the immediate eviction order signed by the judge." Heather's mother appeared behind her daughter, wringing her hands. "What's happening?" I stepped forward then, my voice steady, my eyes locked on every one of them. "What's happening is that you invaded my home, destroyed my property, and tried to strip me of everything I've built. Today, the law says enough." Veronica, Heather's sister, came out holding her phone high, ebony, recording like she had the right to broadcast my humiliation. "This is elder abuse," she shouted. "You're throwing family out onto the street." The notary stepped forward sharply. "Miss, put the phone down immediately. This is an official proceeding, and you are not authorized to record." Richard's calm voice carried over her protests. "Furthermore, we are filing a complaint for the theft of jewelry and valuables. A detailed list has been provided to the police." The officer's eyes narrowed at Heather. "Where are the pearl earrings that belonged to Mrs. Hayes's mother? The gold watch of her late husband? The silver coins?" Heather's face flushed crimson. "I don't know what you're talking about." "And one more matter," Richard continued, sliding another paper forward. "We have evidence of falsified medical documents, a fraudulent report claiming Mrs. Hayes suffers from dementia, signed by a doctor who has never once examined her. This is a federal crime." The officer's jaw tightened. "Is that true, ma'am? Did you pay for a false report?" Heather stammered. We just wanted to help her. She's too old to manage properties." "So you decided to steal her house with forged papers?" His voice cut like a blade. At that moment, the sound of tires screeching on gravel turned every head. Dan's Toyota skidded to a stop in the driveway, and he stumbled out, pale and frantic. "What's going on here?" Richard faced him calmly. "Your wife and her family are being evicted for trespassing. And you, Mr. Hayes, are being cited as an accomplice in attempted property fraud." "Fraud?" Dan's voice cracked. "She's my mother." I held up the incriminating documents. "The transfer papers you agreed to sign, the fake medical report you knew about. Don't you dare act surprised." Dan's eyes flicked to Heather, who hissed something into his ear. He shook his head. "What did she just tell you, Dan?" I asked coldly. His voice faltered. "She wants me to say you're confused, that you imagine things. And what are you going to say?" For one long moment I thought he might choose her over me again. But he only muttered, I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing," Richard cut in. He handed Dan his official citation. "You are ordered to appear in court within 3 days to answer charges of complicity in attempted fraud against a senior citizen." Heather's scream shattered the silence. "This is outrageous. We're family. You can't do this to us." The officer replied, calm and cold, "Ma'am, you have 2 hours to collect your belongings. Anything that belongs to Mrs. Hayes stays here. If you refuse, you will be arrested for trespassing." The terrace exploded into chaos. Heather barked orders. Children wailed. Veronica tried to keep recording until the officer confiscated her phone. Heather's mother sat down on the steps and wept loudly, blaming Heather for dragging them into this disaster. Dan moved like a ghost, carrying suitcases to the car, never once meeting my eyes. From the garden, one small boy tugged at my sleeve. "Ma'am, why are you kicking us out? We didn't do anything wrong." My throat tightened. "You're right, sweetheart. You didn't. But this house belongs to me, and your family never asked permission. That's why you have to leave." Heather swooped in, yanking the boy away. "Don't you dare confuse my children." "I'm not confusing them," I said quietly. "You did that when you told them this was their house." The boy looked up at his mother, his little brow furrowed. "But Mom, you said it was ours." Heather silenced him with a sharp glare. As the minutes ticked by, the humiliation deepened. Suitcases banged against the doorframe, plastic bags ripped, shouts echoed. The proud new homeowners became nothing more than trespassers scrambling under a deadline. I stood in my garden, my back straight, watching them dismantle their lives piece by piece. For the first time in days, I breathed freely. Margaret Hayes had taken back her house, and this was only the beginning. Tuesday morning broke bright and sharp, as though the heavens themselves were preparing to bear witness to justice. At exactly 8 o'clock, I stepped out of a taxi, my gray suit pressed, hair neatly pinned, a folder of evidence tucked firmly under my arm. Beside me walked Richard Coleman, my attorney, steady, precise, and exuding the quiet confidence of a man who had fought battles like this before. Behind him came a uniformed police officer and a public notary, their presence radiating authority. The 4 of us marched up the familiar driveway, and from a distance I could already see Heather's clan lounging on the terrace, cups of steaming coffee in hand, their laughter spilling into the morning air. They looked as though they owned the place. But when they noticed the patrol car pulling up alongside us, their faces shifted in a single wave, from smug assurance to raw panic. Heather's porcelain mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the stone tiles. Richard's voice was calm but powerful, echoing against the walls of my house. "Good morning. I am attorney Richard Coleman, representing Mrs. Margaret Hayes, the sole legal owner of this property. We are here under a court order to serve an immediate eviction for unlawful trespassing." Heather stormed down the steps, hair wild, fury blazing in her eyes. "This is outrageous. This is my husband's house. He's her son. This belongs to us, too." The officer's tone was clipped, unyielding. "Do you have documentation proving ownership, ma'am?" Heather faltered. "My husband is her only child. That gives us rights." Richard didn't even blink. He opened his leather briefcase and withdrew a neat stack of papers. "Here is the original deed to the property, 100% in Mrs. Hayes's name. Here are the tax receipts from the last 5 years, all paid exclusively by her. And here is the court-issued eviction order signed yesterday by Judge Whitman." Heather's mother appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "What's going on? Why are the police here?" I stepped forward, meeting their eyes one by one. My voice was steady, ice cutting through velvet. What's going on is simple. You invaded my home, trashed my belongings, and tried to steal my life's work. Today, the law is correcting your mistake. Veronica, Heather's sister, rushed out, holding her phone high, recording. This is elder abuse, she shrieked. You're throwing family out on the street. The notary's stern voice cut through the commotion. Miss, put the phone down immediately. This is an official proceeding. Unauthorized recording is not permitted. Richard continued without pause. Additionally, we are filing a police complaint regarding the theft of jewelry and valuables. A detailed inventory has already been submitted. The officer turned to Heather, eyes narrowing. Where are the pearl earrings that belonged to Mrs. Hayes's mother? The gold watch of her late husband? The collection of silver coins? Heather flushed crimson. I don't know what you're talking about. Richard pulled out yet another document. And finally, we have proof of falsified medical records, an entirely fabricated report declaring Mrs. Hayes mentally incompetent, signed by a doctor who has never once examined her. That is a federal crime. The officer's face hardened. Is that true? Did you pay for a false medical report? Heather stammered. We only wanted to help. She's too old to manage so much property. Help? The officer's voice was sharp. By forging documents and attempting to steal her house? Before anyone could respond, the screech of tires split the air. A car pulled up fast. Dan's shiny Toyota. He stumbled out, pale and frantic, his tie askew. What's happening here? He demanded, nearly breathless. Richard turned to face him. Mr. Hayes, your wife and her family are being evicted for unlawful occupation. And you, sir, are being cited as an accomplice in attempted property fraud against your mother. Dan's eyes darted from Richard to me. Fraud? She's my mother. I held up the incriminating documents. Don't you dare feign ignorance, Daniel. I found the property transfer forms with your signature waiting at the bottom. And the fake medical report. Did you think I wouldn't discover it? His hands shook violently. For a fleeting second, I saw the terrified boy he once was. But before guilt could take hold, Heather rushed to his side and hissed something in his ear. What did she just tell you, Dan? I asked, my gaze piercing him. He looked trapped, his lips trembling. She wants me to say you're confused, that you imagine things. And are you going to say that? His voice cracked. I don't know what to say, Mom. Then say nothing, Richard interjected smoothly. He handed Dan an official summons. You are required to appear in court within 3 days to answer charges of complicity in attempted elder fraud. Heather let out a piercing scream. This is insane. We're family. You can't do this to us. The officer remained unmoved. Ma'am, you have exactly 2 hours to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. Anything belonging to Mrs. Hayes remains here. If you refuse, you will be arrested. Chaos erupted. Heather barked orders at her family, her voice cracking with desperation. Children began wailing, confused and frightened. Veronica tried to film again until the officer confiscated her phone. Heather's mother sank onto the steps, sobbing and berating her daughter. You told me everything was fine. You said she agreed. What have you done to us? Dan carried suitcases in silence, his face gray, avoiding my eyes, as though even looking at me might break him completely. Then, in the midst of the noise, a small boy tugged at my sleeve. His eyes brimmed with tears. Ma'am, why are you making us leave? We didn't do anything bad. My heart clenched. I crouched down, lowering my voice to a gentle tone. You're right, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. But this house is mine. Your family never asked permission to stay here, and that's why you have to go. Heather swooped in, yanking the boy away. Don't you dare confuse my child. You're poisoning him against us. I rose slowly, my eyes steady. No, Heather, you did that when you told him this house was his. The boy looked up at her, confusion written on his small face. But, Mom, you said it was ours. Heather silenced him with a glare. The minutes dragged on, every second stretching the humiliation. Suitcases thudded down the stairs. Plastic bags tore under the weight of too many belongings. Children cried while adults bickered, their voices rising in panic. The proud new homeowners had been reduced to trespassers scrambling under the watchful eye of the law. I stood in the garden, hands folded before me, breathing in the salt air. My flowers were trampled, my furniture scratched, but my dignity was intact. For the first time in a week, the weight lifted from my chest. I had not only taken back my house, I had taken back myself. Margaret Hayes was no longer a victim. She was a victor, and this was only the beginning. The 2 hours ticked away like the final beats of a funeral drum. My once peaceful home had become a stage for chaos, every corner echoing with the frantic shouts and sobs of a family being stripped of their illusion. Heather stormed from room to room, her voice shrill as she barked orders at her sister and mother. "Pack faster! Don't forget the towels! Grab the kids' clothes!" Sweat dampened her hairline, mascara smudged across her cheeks. Gone was the smug hostess of last week. In her place stood a frantic woman, clawing at scraps of control that no longer existed. Veronica dragged plastic bags bulging with clothes down the stairs, her phone confiscated, but her eyes still darting for attention. "Everyone is going to hear about this," she muttered bitterly. "We'll show the world what kind of woman you really are, Margaret." The police officer didn't even look up from his watch. "Miss, if you continue to cause disruption, I'll have you escorted out in handcuffs." Heather's mother, exhausted and defeated, sat slumped on the bottom step, arms wrapped around her knees. "This is your fault, Heather," she moaned between sobs. "You told me everything was fine. You told me the old woman had agreed. Now look at us." Heather snapped back, her voice breaking. "Shut up, Mom. Just help me pack." The children were the hardest to watch. Their laughter from days ago was gone, replaced with tears and confusion. One boy clutched a toy car in his fist, his lower lip trembling. "Why can't we stay, Mommy? I liked it here." "Because," Heather hissed, "your grandmother doesn't want us here. She doesn't care about you." My chest tightened at the cruelty of the words, but I said nothing. Some truths children would discover on their own in time. Dan was silent through it all, moving like a shadow. He carried suitcase after suitcase, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the ground. At one point, he passed close enough that I could smell the sweat and shame clinging to him. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words died on his tongue. He turned away. Neighbors had begun to gather at the edges of the driveway. Curious faces peeked over fences, whispers carried through the air. Phones lifted discreetly, capturing photos of the spectacle. By the end of the day, I knew this scene would be all over town. Heather's family, parading in with arrogance, now leaving in disgrace under police escort. "Mom, please talk to her," Veronica begged Dan, her voice dripping with venom. "Make her stop this. She's humiliating all of us." Dan didn't reply. He set down the final suitcase by the car and leaned against it, head bowed. For the first time in his life, my son looked smaller than the boy I had raised. At the 90-minute mark, Richard checked his watch. "You have 30 minutes left," he announced calmly. Heather exploded. "This is barbaric. We have children. We can't just leave like criminals." "You should have thought of that before forging documents," Richard replied evenly. Her voice cracked into a scream. "We didn't steal anything. We were just—" "Stop lying, Heather." My voice cut across hers, steady, firm. "You didn't just steal objects. You tried to steal dignity, family, and legacy, and those can never be yours." She glared at me with eyes that could have burned holes through steel. "You'll regret this. You've humiliated us in front of everyone." "No," I said softly. "You humiliated yourselves the moment you treated me like a stranger in my own home." At last, the cars were loaded. Children buckled in, their cries muffled by the slam of doors. Heather climbed into the passenger seat, her face twisted into a mask of rage and humiliation. Veronica followed in her own car, slamming the door so hard it rattled. Heather's mother shuffled into the back seat without a word, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Dan was the last. He lingered by his car door, his hand resting on the frame. For a brief moment, he looked at me across the driveway. Our eyes met, mother and son, bound by blood, separated by betrayal. His lips parted as though an apology teetered on the edge, but instead he muttered, "You chose this, Mom." I held his gaze. "No, Daniel, you chose." He got in the car and slammed the door. Engines roared to life, tires spun on the gravel, and just like that, they were gone. Dust rising behind them, their humiliation trailing like smoke. Silence fell, heavy and cleansing. The officer handed Richard a final signed form, then gave me the keys. "Mrs. Hayes, the property is officially secure. They won't be back." Richard smiled faintly. "Round one goes to you, Margaret." I stood at the foot of my garden, the salt air brushing against my face, the familiar rhythm of waves crashing beyond the deck. My flowers were battered, my furniture scratched, but my home, my sanctuary, was mine again, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly, defiantly free. The day after the eviction, my house was quiet again. The silence was almost disorienting after the chaos of the weekend. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, smoothing my hand over the furniture, breathing in the faint traces of salt air that mingled with lemon polish from the cleaning service I had hired. But beneath the peace, a storm brewed in me. Kicking them out wasn't enough. Heather had humiliated me, stolen from me, and tried to erase my very name from my own deed. If I stopped now, I would only be waiting for their next attack. I wasn't going to live like prey in the sanctuary I had built. At 9 o'clock sharp, I met Richard Coleman in his office. His shelves were lined with thick legal volumes, his desk stacked neatly with case files. He gestured for me to sit. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, adjusting his glasses, "the eviction was just the first step. Now we move into the criminal phase." I handed him the folder I'd compiled. Photographs of the trashed kitchen, broken china, torn curtains, and the secret closet that had been ransacked. Every bit of damage. "Every missing item," I said firmly. He flipped through the evidence, nodding. "Excellent. We'll file a police report for theft and property destruction. The stolen jewelry in particular strengthens the case. With the insurance records for your husband's watch, we can push for charges of grand larceny." "And the fake medical report?" I asked. My voice trembled with both anger and anticipation. Richard's expression darkened. "That's the crown jewel of your case. Falsifying medical records to declare you incompetent is a felony. We'll report it to the district attorney's office, and the medical board will handle disciplinary measures against the doctor. He's exposed himself to criminal prosecution and license suspension." My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear, it was relief. "So it won't just vanish into thin air? Not a chance. In fact," Richard leaned forward, "with your son's name on those documents, he's legally complicit. Heather may have pulled the strings, but Daniel signed. He cannot claim ignorance." The words pierced me, but I forced myself to stay strong. "So what happens next?" "Tomorrow morning I'll file 3 motions. One for criminal theft, one for document falsification, and one for fraud against a senior citizen. Once accepted, the DA's office will investigate. We'll also request a restraining order to prevent them from setting foot on this property again." "And how long until it all becomes public?" I asked. Richard smiled faintly. "Court filings are public record, Mrs. Hayes. Local journalists love cases like this: family betrayal, fraud, police eviction. Once word spreads, Heather and Dan won't just face legal consequences. They'll face social ones." That afternoon, I drove home with a strange new fire in my chest. For years, I had been the quiet seamstress, the widow who lived modestly, who never caused trouble. Now I was the woman taking her own family to court, and I felt no shame. At dusk, the phone rang. It was Veronica. Her voice was trembling, desperate. "Mrs. Hayes, please, can't we fix this privately? The lawyers are draining us. Dan has already spent over $15,000 on legal fees. Heather is panicking." I listened silently, letting her words hang in the air. "You already got your house back," she pleaded. "Why keep pushing? Why drag the children into this? Why ruin Dan's career? His boss will fire him if this becomes public." Finally, I spoke, calm but unyielding. "I'm not the one who ruined Dan's career. He ruined it the moment he signed fraudulent documents against his own mother." She broke into sobs. "Please, Heather has kids to feed." She should have thought of them before she tried to rob me, I replied. This isn't just about a house, Veronica. This is about principle, about dignity, about justice. I hung up before she could answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the length of my deck under the stars, listening to the ocean's eternal rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not because I had money or lawyers, but because I had chosen not to surrender. The following morning, Richard filed the motions. By noon, the police were already investigating the doctor who signed the false report. Word spread fast. A local news outlet called me for a statement, and though I gave none, the headline appeared online that same evening. Widow battles son and daughter-in-law over alleged fraudulent property transfer. Neighbors stopped me on the street the next day. Margaret, we had no idea. You're so brave, one whispered. Another said, I always thought Heather was trouble. Good for you for standing up. Each word strengthened my resolve. The shame was no longer mine, it was theirs. For Heather and Dan, the nightmare had only just begun. Court dates, mounting legal fees, and whispers that followed them wherever they went. They had wanted to paint me as a senile old woman. Instead, I was the woman who exposed them as thieves. Justice was no longer a dream. It was in motion, rolling forward with the weight of truth and law behind it. And I promised myself I would see it through, every step, every hearing, every humiliating headline, until the world knew exactly what happens when you underestimate Margaret Hayes. By the time the first court date arrived, the story had already spread far beyond the neighborhood. The local paper had picked it up, followed by a regional news channel. The headline was brutal and unforgettable. Widow battles own son over alleged elder fraud. It was the kind of headline that burrowed into people's minds. At the grocery store, at church, even on the beach, strangers gave me nods of solidarity. Good for you, one elderly man told me in the produce aisle. Too many people think they can push us aside when we get older. You're showing them we still have fight. Meanwhile, Heather and Dan couldn't walk down Main Street without whispers trailing them. That's the couple that tried to steal from his mother, I overheard a woman murmur. The words hit their reputation harder than any legal document ever could. Inside the courthouse, the tension was thick enough to taste. Heather sat stiffly in a charcoal dress, her hair perfectly styled, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Dan sat beside her, shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the table. Richard Coleman leaned toward me, his voice calm. Stay composed. We have the evidence. Let them unravel themselves. The judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, opened the session. We are here to address claims of unlawful trespassing, property damage, theft of valuables, and the alleged falsification of medical documents involving Mrs. Margaret Hayes. Heather's lawyer rose first, oozing false confidence. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a family misunderstanding, blown wildly out of proportion. My clients were invited to the home. Any documents suggesting otherwise are simply administrative missteps, not malicious intent. Richard stood next, his voice sharp as a blade. With respect, Your Honor, we have clear evidence this was no misunderstanding. We have photographs of the damage to Mrs. Hayes' home, an insurance report confirming the theft of jewelry, and most importantly, he held up the forged dementia report, a fraudulent medical document claiming Mrs. Blythe Hayes is incompetent, signed by a physician who has admitted under oath that he never examined her. The courtroom stirred, the judge's eyes narrowed. Fraudulent medical reports are a serious matter. Counselor, do your clients dispute the authenticity of this evidence? Heather's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We contest the interpretation, not the document itself. Richard pounced. Interpretation? Your Honor, there is no interpretation here. This is fraud, calculated, deliberate fraud, committed against a 70-year-old widow by her own family. Heather's face flushed. She leaned toward Dan, whispering furiously. He avoided her gaze, his jaw clenched tight. The judge turned to them. Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything to say in your defense? Heather shot up from her seat. This is ridiculous. We were only trying to help her. She's old. She barely comes to the house. The judge slammed her gavel. Sit down, Mrs. Hayes. Age does not equal incompetence, and it certainly does not grant you the right to forge documents. Heather collapsed back into her chair, trembling with rage. When it was Dan's turn to speak, his voice was barely audible. I made a mistake, Your Honor. I let things go too far. The judge's gaze softened for only a moment. Mistakes are forgetting to pay a bill, Mr. Hayes. Mistakes are misplacing your car keys. What you did was participate in a calculated scheme to defraud your own mother. That is not a mistake. That is betrayal. The words echoed in the courtroom like thunder. Outside, the reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel about your son's admission? Do you believe your daughter-in-law orchestrated the fraud? Are you seeking jail time? I kept my answers brief, steady. I am here for justice, not revenge. I built that house with my own 2 hands, and I will not let anyone take it from me, not even family. The clip aired that night on the evening news. By the next morning, Heather and Dan's faces were plastered across social media, their names trending for all the wrong reasons. Former friends stopped calling. Dan's boss at the insurance firm put him on unpaid leave, citing damage to the company's reputation. The bills piled higher for them: attorney fees, court fines, and the looming threat of restitution for the jewelry and damages. I heard through whispers that they had already sold their second car and maxed out their credit cards. For me, the battle was painful but strangely clarifying. Each hearing stripped away another layer of illusion, revealing the truth for everyone to see. They hadn't just wronged me. They had wronged themselves, their children, and the very foundation of trust a family should be built upon. As the judge adjourned the first round of hearings, I felt no triumph, only resolve. Heather and Dan had wanted to portray me as a helpless old woman. Instead, the world now saw me as what I had always been, a woman who fought for what was hers, no matter the cost. And the fight was far from over.